All right, all right. Well, welcome to another exhilarating episode of Energy Bites. I'm Bobby Nealon. Got my trusty co-host John Calfan, the Rad Dad, with me,
What's up, everybody?
and excited to have on Jeff Hughes. I mean, if you would have asked me a couple years ago, or a year or two ago, people probably wouldn't have thought I would have Jeff Hughes on a podcast because the way we go back and forth on LinkedIn. But
oh, absolutely.
But no, actually become really good friends. Jeff is the founder at PointFlow Technologies. Is that Point?
Yeah, PointFlow.co, PointFlow Companies is the parent company to 405
Okay.
Shoot Offs. So.
Yeah, I know you're working on that structure a little bit. You know, can't really put yourself in a box, but yeah, no, super excited to have him on. I mean, Jeff's got a lot of great experience in the energy industry and a lot of opinions too, which we like.
We do,
so,
especially because they don't always go with what everybody else is doing, which is
I typically like to go the opposite way.
Me too.
Yeah. Much.
Swimming upstream makes you stronger. I didn't realize too that's kind of a pun. Yeah, a little upstream oil and gas. Touche.
I like
Yeah.
it. Hey, you gotta have the dad jokes.
Awesome. Well, but either way, let's just jump right into it. And Jeff, first off, let everyone know who you are, and then kind of start. How'd you get into, maybe technology in general? Did you do any coding as a kid, and then just your background, how you got in oil and gas, and what got you to this point?
Sure. Yeah, it's kind of a crazy career path. I have a degree in accounting. Stayed from Oklahoma State and stayed there. Got my MBA. I had the perfect setup with scholarship and a roommate that was a bartender, so I was not planning on leaving that anytime soon. So stayed there, degree in accounting, jumped to One Oak in Tulsa, and my first kind of interaction with coding was I was actually an engineering major for a couple of years, and like all of the engineering majors in my fraternity, we dropped out and became accountants. But in the engineering class, there was an engineering computer programming. It was a VBA behind Excel and how to build apps and how to kind of.
I laugh because I took the same class.
Well, at least you had that. At least that was useful. Like my engineering math was MATLAB. It was awful.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
I loved it, man.
Yeah.
It was awesome. But I got to One Oak and I was a credit analyst, so sitting on the energy trade floor, which was awesome. I wanted to be an energy trader so bad. They were like yelling deals, and I mean, they got an argument one day about who had the best barbecue ribs. So they sent a guy to go get all the ribs in Tulsa, and they had a taste testing, and it was just an awesome environment. And so they would propose a deal with a certain company. They'd be like, "Hey, credit team, how much risk or exposure do we have, and how much can we go?" So I would open up the 10K on these clients and key all this information into a financial model, and it would spit out an answer. And I started thinking, I was like, man, this is inefficient and ridiculous. So there's an empty Blueburn terminal, and I connected that to their model and then built it where you could just type in the ticker and it auto-populated the model and gave the decision. And my boss at the time was like, well, I don't have any more work for you now, so just kind of hang out. So I literally just hung out for a couple months, and they made me an offer to move to a different company or a different department. And at the time, my girlfriend, now wife, had moved to OKC. So I jumped down to Chaparral in the finance department and kind of did the same thing, was drawn towards the tech side. Our forecast software is called TM1. It was a cube-based IBM product. It was actually really cool, but pulled from Aries, pulled from Inertia, pulled from all these different sources, and gave our finance team the ability to kind of manipulate data and present the forecast. Well, the sysadmin of it left, and they were like, "Hey, Jeff, you know this pretty well. Like, do you want to run this system?" I said, "Sure." So I kind of took over that and kept my tech path going. Fast forward a little bit, a guy named Scott Van Sickle was an engineer over there and kind of got word of me. And at the time,
shout out to
I was
Scott.
just as argumentative, so I would, shout out to Scott.
I think at some point
we bonded over a. He's a genius, man. He was kind of the reason for my data love. Just quick note, he at the company we started together, he's the CEO, and we basically stood up his own SQL server so he can write his own scripts and do his own coding and build his own Spotfire. It's wild how much he gets that piece. But so he poached me over to the engineering team to help run WellView and data and all that kind of stuff. So we worked together for 2 or 3 years there, and I was kind of I was an engineering tech supervisor, and kind of at the top of that career path, nowhere else to go, and had talked to him about. And I was like, hey, I'm looking for other jobs, and he was like, hey, we potentially got this deal coming up, so we left Chaparral and started Revolution Resources in 2018, which was kind of wild because I was having my first kid and told my wife, I was like, hey, I'm quitting this job and starting a company. And she was like, what? yeah, we're going to start a oil and gas company. But it was an awesome ride, man. We got funding from Mountain Capital out of Houston and bought an asset from Gas Star, the West Edmond Hunt and Lime unit, and it was fun. It was 4 of us. It was like that small office, the
startup
casual feel. You're playing Smash Brothers at 2:00, and sometimes you're working till 11 p.m. kind of thing. But it was a fun ride. So started Revolution in 2018. Grew from us 4 to we had 3 acquisitions, and we ended up buying Jones Energy, and we had like 65 people at that time. And my initial role was IT, accounting, gas and oil marketing, basically everything non-engineering, and I loved it. And by the time we were big enough, my role was, they were like, hey, you gotta wear less hats. So I became IT director, did that for a couple of years, and got bored with it, honestly. And I was like, I want to start my own consulting company, and that's where PointFlow was born. Is I was like, I still want to do accounting, and I still want to do IT, and I still want to build data warehouses, and I still want to kind of take on the WellViews of the world. And that was the genesis of it.
No, that's a common theme on the with pretty much all of our guests, is there is not like a traditional route to getting into to data or data science or technology at all. And I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, I think the one constant is just like curiosity, and then like, I got a problem, I need to solve it. Efficiency,
problems, absolutely.
And obviously computers are a huge part of.
Right. I mean, it sounds like you engineered your job away at the first company. The first time you went to work, when you automated the reporting stuff, you're like, oh, we don't need an analyst to analyze all of this stuff anymore. It just happens.
Yeah, I was like, why am I combing through a 10K and keying this stuff in?
Right.
So I mean,
it's a connected Bloomberg terminal, but let's just use technology.
So I mean, and I do want to get into PointFlow, but let's step back to Revolution. I mean, like, so you got to stand this up, right? I mean,
awesome.
like, yeah. I mean, so from the tech in the data side, I mean, like, talk about like what you chose, why you chose it. I mean, what worked, heck, what would you do different, if anything? I mean, and just kind of, and then we could kind of parlay that into how has that influenced what you're doing at PointFlow.
There's a lot of people out there that, if I could re-architect it today, this is what I would do. They inherit all of this architecture tools and stuff, and they hate them. And so I'm sure that was fun on your end, being able to, well, it's fun and daunting all at the same time, right? Like, you're like, well, I think this is the right decision, but so yeah, explain some more on that.
Sure. Yeah. We were lucky enough to be at Chaparral for long enough to kind of be ingrained with the IT department and kind of see what they were doing right and what they were doing wrong. So our thought and plan was to be super cost efficient, because that's kind of what we sold ourselves as a team on, was that we were super, cheap, if you want to call it. But so we had some experiences with efforts to build applications internally that costs ran away and it just never worked. So we kind of had the mindset of, let's find solutions that are out there that are affordable. So we started with kind of the production software, and we were like, we demoed a few, and we ended up picking iWell, mainly because they had an API. It was like, yes, here's the app. It looks good. It's clean. You can collect data. But my concern as the IT guy was like, can I pull data from this and manipulate it and push it back?
Yeah.
It was like, do I have that capacity? So we picked iWell from the kind of pumper standpoint. We picked WellView for the same reason, as as long as you don't move over to that WellView cloud, you can keep WellView on-prem and kind of manipulate your data and control your own destiny. So we did that. And that's when we kind of debated and went back and forth on, and this is what Bobby and I always argue about, is cloud versus on-prem. And I will say what his major counterpoint is always like infrastructure or your office. And the office we found had a great server room, had independent air conditioning and a natural gas generator for backup. So it was a perfect setup. We had a server rack just sitting there. So we decided to do on-prem. We bought 4 Dell R720s, just refurbished from a guy named Tech Mike, New York. We got those 4. We set them up in a little clustered environment, and we spun up our virtual machines on that. Bought some Ubiquity switches and gateway, and kind of that was our on-prem network setup. At first, we were, I think for the first 8 months, we were just, it was about, I don't know, in Welu, probably 300-ish wells. So we were just running kind of the PDP analysis and how do we cut LOE, how do we get production up. So it was just kind of those softwares. It was iWell, WellView, Spotfire. We threw Spotfire on, and then our kind of on-prem infrastructure. Oh, and Aries. We picked up Aries just because.
And was iWell handling like production accounting? Like that was, let's say, instead of like America or something like that? Or
no, so, yeah, kind of. So pumpers enter the tank gauges, meter readings, all that kind of stuff. And then I pulled it into SQL and ran any type of allocations because we had some shared batteries that we had to allocate to. And I just wrote the allocations in SQL to then dump to our outsourced accounting team, Finley and Cook. But yeah, and Aries is, I mean, the banks demanded it at that time, so we went with Aries. And again, SQL backend, so you can kind of manipulate it and keep it updated, all that kind of stuff. But hindsight, I don't know that we would have done much different. It was super affordable, and I had it. It's funny. I had it set up in my living room before we even found an office. We had the servers kind of set up next to my bed, and I got a picture of like all these boxes in my foyer, and my wife was not exactly thrilled with it, but I was like, we'll eventually find an office that we can move all this to. But but man, it was a blast. I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. It was a great learning experience and really fun.
I think one story you've told, and probably just a good one to have on here. I mean, let's talk about maybe going out into the field. But I think you said something. I don't know if you were out on a rig or something, and they pulled you up.
Oh yeah, yeah. I did. Again, being the mindset of cheap, is I went out to the field and handled stuff as much as we could, because any type of SCADA consultant or any consultant is pretty expensive. So when we eventually started drilling after those 8 months. We hired a drilling engineer and geologist, and once we did, I kind of did the IT in the field and hooked up the comm devices for SCADA. Then we ran the internet for the drilling rig. So we had a consultant out there who was doing, I can't remember, it was like $100 a day for internet, and it was the slowest. We couldn't sync on it. The guys couldn't stream anything, and the rig's like about 8 miles from our office, and we had a 4-story building. Just 3-story, and I was like, I bet we could put a horn up here and just shoot it to the rig. So we bought a little $60 Ubiquity antenna and put it up there, and I went and held it out there, and I was like, oh yeah, it works. So we did our own internet, and then they had like full streaming high-speed internet out there.
That's awesome.
So I'd hook that up each location, and then we had one location where they were down in a little hole, and we could not get the horn to communicate at all. And the company man was like, hey, you can climb up the derrick there and hook it up. And I was like, I don't really want to do that. I'm pretty afraid of heights. And he was like, oh, I'm not going to do it. And I was like, oh, okay. He's like, why don't you go ahead and do it? And our drilling engineer was there too. And he was like, I will. He said, well, I'll call you and we'll each get AirPods in, and I'll tell you like if the horns can see each other and how to line them up. And I was like, okay. Well, I'm afraid of heights, definitely afraid of heights. And so we get up to the derrick to climb it, and he asked me how much I weigh. I'm like, oh, I weigh 185. And he's like, all right, cool. And he's like, all right, strap in. And I'm like, I strap in. He's like, all right, let him go. And it just starts like pulling me up.
Yeah.
I'm like, what the hell? And I'm like halfway up, and I just kind of like lock in, and Miles is on the phone, and he's like, the horns can see each other. Go ahead and mount it there. Oh, so I mount it, and got good connection, good speed. To get down, I'm like having to like do curls to pull myself down. And I get all the way to the bottom, and I'm like, Matt Leverett was the company manager. I was like, Matt, what did you do? He was like, well, you told me you're afraid of heights, so once you said you were 185, we set the climb assist to like 215 to make sure your ass got up that rig. I was like, oh, okay. He's like, because if you got stuck, I would have to climb it without the climb assist and get you down. It's like, fair enough. So that was my one and only time to climb the rig, and I didn't even climb it. Just pulled me up.
I thought you were going to be going towards the other direction where it was like, oh, the harness is rated for 200, so you're good by 15 whole pounds like that.
Yeah.
You know.
Nope, they just yanked me all the way up.
Yeah.
But it was that kind of stuff
approved, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure every safety man would have approved.
It was just a really cool experience to
Yeah.
kind of start an operator from the ground up and be involved in that kind of stuff.
I want to hear some more thoughts, because we've talked about this prior. For those that don't know, Jeff does a energy and whiskey data night that, or most of last year, we've had tons of conversations on. But I think one of the big ones that was really interesting to me, just because, you know, I've always been on the ops side, is all the account, like y'all had a conversation at one point about what is a unique well identifier. Like, how do you actually come up with that? Because there are so many different ways. And of course, that's just like a really interesting question to me as someone who understands all of that, but has never had to, you know, have the day-to-day hands-on with it. So I want to pick your brain on that. So when y'all were setting, because you got to set it up from scratch, which is, you know, most people, grass is always greener, right? I hate whatever services I'm using, or I hate how we use identifiers or whatever. So I'm curious how y'all went about doing that, you know, because again, I think of it from just like the operations data side of things, but then when you get into accounting, it's a whole nother.
Well, you're thinking of it as, I mean, most people it's, I think of it almost like a catch in the NFL. Like, I know what a catch is when I see it. I mean, like,
right.
But then like, oh wait, I guess that was a catch.
That's a great analogy.
But like, I think a lot of people think of it, there's the surface hole, but then there's just so much more below the surface, no pun intended.
Yeah.
Like it just, but I mean, I'll let Jeff jump in and talk about how they set it up and kind of even just your thoughts on it now.
Yeah, that's my big thing,
I think
right?
we even talked about it, about a month or two ago, Jeff? Like you were asking me like, how do you guys do it?
Yeah. Well, it's just fascinating.
I feel like these people are gaslighting me.
Yeah. Well, there's so many opportunities for ways to do it, right? So I think it's fascinating to ask people, especially when they can do it from scratch. Like, what was your mindset going into it? What were you trying to make sure didn't happen? And things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we, again, we were involved in the data warehouse build out of Chaparral, so we had a pretty good idea of what we wanted to do, and I kind of still stick to that same thing. As we use, to me, you pick a software.
Yeah,
we picked WellView. You could pick Aries, you could pick your accounting ERP, whatever it is, and to me, that becomes your unique well identifier. You just have to make sure that you push the wells into that software. And I think Bobby and you and I have talked, and I'm pretty anti-API on this. I mean, I think the API is useful for a lot of things and a lot of joins, like API 10 especially, which you get.
We're talking about
past the 10,
well API numbers.
Yeah, UWI API, like the API standard or whatever, which is not even set by the actual API now, I don't think. And
oh, really?
Yeah. And then I think I just heard too that like, is it the state of Virginia, which I didn't know they had oil wells, but like they still don't use the API number. It's something bizarre.
It's by state, isn't it?
Yeah. Because even like, I think, you know,
part of the API,
North Dakota will give an API 14, but it's just the 4 zeros. So then like you're at the mercy of what IHS thinks the API 10 and versus what Inveris thinks it is, and so on and so forth. But
it's a good like, hey, this is probably the well identifier.
Yeah.
The API 10. But we did like, we picked WellView, and WellView generates an ID well for each well. So whether it's kind of a potential planning well in Aries, we push that to WellView, or an extra asset in accounting, we push it to WellView, and then we just label it in WellView as a type, is not a well, right? So then your engineers, their view is only filtered to wells, but we use that well header in WellView as our central database. And
so it's just a relationship there.
Yeah, it's just a relationship. So then you've got cross references. I think in WellView they call them like well IDA, well IDB, C, D, and that's where you kind of cross reference between your systems. Is you put in your Aries prop num as one, or your inertia or Bolo ID, or your
cross
land
stuff or whatever.
Vantage land. Yeah, Yeah. So then you kind of use that as your, I don't know, your quarterback, if you will. Everybody comes
Right.
there and links back out. And that's anybody I build a kind of a data warehouse for is, I build the same way as I push towards, hey, let's pick a system, because to me, whoever the kind of person that can see that UI makes it a ton easier
Right.
than having to rely on someone who knows SQL. Like,
Yeah.
hey, can we go add this well to this? It's like, yeah, your system is Aries, right? So go
Yeah.
add a well to Aries, or go add a well to WellView. It just gives you a cleaner UI than having
Right.
to put a help desk ticket in and have the IT guy make it SQL.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, we roll with Aries kind of as the spine of our kind of, golden record, but mainly just because like a well has to be created in Aries, well before it even ever gets an API number or for us
Sure.
ever gets put into open wells for us, but I guess to your credit, what y'all were saying was as soon as you would create a stick in Aries, it would get created as an inventory type asset in WellView.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we ended up building kind of AFE workflows in WellView. We also built non-op proposals. So non-op proposal comes in, you generate the well in WellView, kick it to Geo and Reservoir, and they put their approval comments or deny comments, and then you've got a PDF that generates from it to whether we elect in or not. So it's kind of and like you said, you could do that in Aries. You could do that in any system. You just need to pick, in my mind, you pick one and then use that unique identifier from the system to be your UWI. You can, and I've seen companies do it where they integrate all of these systems into a separate data table and then they auto-generate UWIs, which you can.
Yeah.
To me, you now rely on an IT guy
Right.
to have to create that, and that's the downside of it.
Well, and I think because we were talking too, but I mean, we did an MDM implementation at University Lands, and it's like then you can have that MDM platform create that, but I mean, there's a lot of overhead there, and what we ended up finding, and I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast, is like half the time it wasn't actually the software. It was like this, by implementing the software, it forced you to actually have the conversations you should have just had.
Right.
Otherwise, because you end up just doing 98% of the time you're doing just coalesce statements that, oh no, if it comes from WellView, use that first. If it comes from
Right.
then use Aries. And then you spent $200,000 for something that if you just would have had the right conversations,
Yeah.
all that to get a unique well identifier, a unique line. But I think one thing, and I think Jeff's really the right person to talk to about this because you come from that accounting background. But one thing I didn't understand or appreciate until I got to GME was, we do a lot of refracts. And the thing with like horizontal refracts is they don't necessarily count as another completion in the traditional sense of, say, even an API 10 or 14. I think that those last four digits have been well thought through by different groups at different points. But you would have a completion record part of the API 14. Well, for a horizontal well, like it's not like you're completing another zone.
Right.
You're just it's more of really a workover.
Yeah.
Actually, but then say for any of these like capital workover type things or a refrac, it creates another payout deck that you have to jib back, or see if people want to consent to that work. Well, from an accounting side, now I've got the original cost center that we still need to track payout against. But then this, different people could elect to be in on drilling, original drilling completions, but then say, no, I don't want to participate in the refrac.
Yeah.
So now it's like you actually have two different cost centers that you're balancing in your accounting system, which are the same well, but they're two different things that need to be allocated. And so then that creates a whole nother level of confusion.
Actually, that's a good point. Jeff, can you just briefly touch on like this whole idea, just for the people that are like purely data science or technology or whatever that might not understand what it actually looks like operating an oil and gas well, about like how that works as far as, the AFEs and the overrides and your working interest and all of that stuff. And with these types of things, as far as like just your initial drilling and completion, and then, I've got a workover or, a refrac or things like that. Like the average person on the technology side has no idea how that works, or royalty interests and all of that fun stuff. So if you could just like briefly, because I'll take 30 minutes to try and explain it.
I was gonna say,
It's a loaded
question, but just like quickly, right? Like you've got all these investors essentially, and then they get the ability to opt in or opt out.
Sure.
Right. And then answer
The
Bobby's
implications.
questions. Yeah. On that side.
Yeah. I mean, that was kind of the genesis for PointFlow accounting. Was I've watched people spend $200,000 on an ERP, and then they track payouts in Excel. It's just like, why are we doing this kind of stuff? Like, I feel like I can do it better. And so we're trying to build, and we have 4 or 5 operators that we're running through our accounting system that we're building ourselves. But yeah, it's a different animal, man. I graduated with accounting degree, and I try to explain to my friends, I'm like, the credit card charge that you put driving to a drilling site is not just one entry, right? It gets now allocated to the 3 wells on this pad, and those 3 wells have 400 owners, and then it gets divided again to those owners. So you've got this one cost line item that ends up as 3 cents to all of these guys who's participated in this well, and it becomes, I don't know, like 800 ledger entries just by allocating and then billing it. You jib it out, whether they pay it back or not, or whether you net it. So each well has like the interest owners, right? You've got to, hey, we're a working interest owner. We participated in this well. We gave you capital, or we're paying our capital piece. And then it's got the royalty owners who own the minerals, and they just have a right to a certain percentage of the profits. So you've got to track, in addition to the well, you've got to track all the owners, and they're called decks, all the division order decks of these wells. And then you take all the costs, allocate them out. And then on the revenue side, it gets even crazier when you've got allocations coming in. You've got one sales meter that feeds 20 wells.
Right.
So you've got to go allocate that to the owners and then divide it up. But the accounting side gets super, super messy. And then you add on kind of what Bobby's talking about. You've got, and this is falling back to Chaparral again, we had a lot of vertical wells that weren't even, like you said, you came in and recompleted. These weren't even recompleted. They were just initially completed. And the owners, the mineral owners, had depth rights. So they owned to a certain depth, and the next owner owned this depth. So you had to set up, essentially, you could do it 2 cost centers where this one well is actually 2 wells, or you could figure out an allocation between the 2 and set it up that way for 2 different decks. But yeah, that's all of that is what makes the oil and gas industry very, very hard to standardize.
Yeah.
And we've talked about it, is like, we can't even agree on what is a well. And I think I've gone to like 4 PPDM meetings, and it's always that conversation, like, can we define a well? It's like, no, you really can't, because to every company, it's complete. Like, some companies don't have that. They don't have that vertical well that has 2 different ownerships, so they don't care. They're like, well, that's not a situation we care about. We only drill new wells. We're gonna trust the API. Like, that's fine until you, like you said, go back into a recomplete. And technically, your recomplete, you should just be a different deck where you track participation, because the first deck would then be inactive until this one pays out. But I
that's
see
what
it both ways
doing. But I think even for us, like, there's a certain period where there's still stuff rolling in for the other deck, like, so there's still costs and stuff rolling in from the previous, cost center.
Right.
And so you've got
to be on the activity date, right? So
you got to leave that
one
open
deck on a certain date. Yeah.
But then depending on your ERPs, maybe you can't have, the same thing active and inactive at the same time.
You should have them both active. You should just have like effective date and effective date beginning. But accountants they'll deactivate the deck completely so it doesn't get any codes hitting it.
Exactly.
It's like, that's not really how the ERP is built to do.
Yeah.
But
people don't understand, even like to your point, just like the depth rights, right? Like, that's a state by state thing. People don't get that. Like, on one hand, it's great that each state has its own, independence and can vote on different things, but there's not a nationwide governance of a lot of this stuff, especially on the data side. And
I'll say thank God on that.
So much harder. Right. Like, there's both sides of that, right? Like, hey, if we had a standard, but also who made that standard and is controlling it and pushing it forward and stuff. But it's it's so complex. Like, we have to do all that stuff just on this zone, and then the zone below it, it's a completely different working interest and mineral owners, and like everything else but it's
all coming out of the same hole.
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah. And then the production is commingled too. So then that gets even more fun.
Let's just, let's jump towards PointFlow now. I mean, we've kind of touched a little bit. You've got a little bit what you do, but let's talk about really more what was the genesis of that. I know you talked a little bit about it, and then maybe why the name, and then just kind of what you guys
tell
do.
Us about it.
Yeah, and it was born out of kind of 2 main drivers in my head. It was one, I was to a point where I was kind of bored at Revolution, as I was just the IT director and we had automated everything. So I kind of come in and check, and if everything ran successfully the night before, which was, I don't know, 80% of the time, then I didn't have a whole lot to do. And I don't like to be bored. I have the kind of a knack to go argue with people or like try to fix or change things. So it didn't sit well there. And then the other piece is Revolution's kind of unique, where they've kept their team really small and they've started to use outsource or contractors for a lot of things. And I kind of saw some inefficiencies in that realm. I was like, man, I can do that better. Like so many, especially in accounting, is I'd watch like the mark to market calculations, and they'd pull the price decks in and compare it against hedges and kind of calculate this mark to market. I was like, man, you should have an auto feed to the pricing. You should database your trades, and then your mark to market is a button push.
Right.
It was like same with accruals, is you pull in your whatever field estimate software you're using,
right,
and write the code to say, okay, here's where they should be, here's where they're at. Like, let's book this adjustment accrual. Boom, button. And I get an accountant's like, took us 3 days to generate the accruals. Like, how? Why? Like, so born out of like, hey, I think I can do it better. And then also I was a little bored in my role. And I remember when I told Scott I was leaving, he was like, are you crazy? Like, you have solid salary. You kind of got it made down there. And I was like, that's not really what I want to keep. I loved the 4-person atmosphere when it's just us four,
right,
kind of hanging out and doing stuff we had never done before and challenging ourselves. So I was like, oh, I'll break out and do that. So the name was just made up. I was just kind of talking to my wife and throwing out names, and I was like, what about PointFlow? She's like, oh, that sounds good. So no real significance behind it. But the idea, my thought has always been, I would love to have 5 or 6 or 7 companies where I can wake up in the morning and then tackle whatever problem that company is having, right? So that's the variety I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So that's why I was like, let's do PointFlow accounting. Let's do PointFlow technologies, which is kind of a low code software spinoff. PointFlow consulting. And then I've got, as I've talked to you, Bobby, the Lux pool cleaning. We started a pool cleaning company that's underneath PointFlow.
Well, like it was like 30-something degrees a month or so ago. You texted me and Talal, and you're like, you got your beanie on. Like, my guy's not showing up. Guess I'm going out. Like,
yeah. I had to go clean some pools that day. It was so cold by like the third. I was like using the pole, and I kind of stretched my hand back out, and my middle finger didn't stretch back out, and I was like, oh god. But yeah, I mean, you own the company. We had one guy on vacation, one guy out with COVID. I was like, well, we got to strap up and go clean. So
yep. Those are the fun things about entrepreneurship no one talks about.
Well, it's like it sucks and fun at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like,
yeah, it was a blast that one day. I don't want to do it the next day. I don't want to do it every day.
Yeah.
Come back to my computer, do a little bit of accounting, and close it down, and flip over and do some data.
Yeah. No, I mean,
that's the idea.
That's honestly why I feel like I like startups so much, is because in those early days or in those growth modes, right, there's just so much shit that needs to be done, and there's such a dynamic, like, there's always something to be done, right? And it could be sales, marketing, data, whatever, but just being able to have that, like, I'm not sitting and doing the same exact thing every single day for the rest of my life. Part of it is one of the reasons I love it so much. I mean, obviously there's plenty more there, but I'm very curious about your thought. I mean, I know your thoughts on kind of cloud and things like that, but I want to understand. I just want you to tell people about kind of that journey for you, because I do think, I mean, obviously the last decade plus, right? Everybody's pushing cloud. You need to move to cloud, blah, blah, blah. And obviously there's lots of benefits to the cloud. There's also lots of drawbacks, right? Like when Bobby came in this morning, I literally had a little build your own PC wizard pulled up, because I'm sick of trying to figure out which cloud instance we're going to set up our machine learning model on. And I'm like,
yeah,
screw it. We're just
welcome to the cloud.
We're just going to build a gaming PC and call it a server, and it's going to run our machine learning models.
Go find a refurb one, man. They're cheap.
Well, the problem, I mean,
the specs he thinks he needs.
The specs, yeah. I was looking at the specs just for like the Mistral 7B one, and it's like 96 gigs of VRAM. It's like, oh, well, I'm probably going to need a server for that. If
yeah, you can definitely buy like a Z820 or something. I guess they're now like, what are they, Z8s?
I have
find
no
a
clue.
refurb there
But
that
even
has
like
that kind of RAM.
the NVIDIA GPU that he was using, he was like, oh yeah, and NVIDIA was nice enough to hook me up with this, RTX 6000. And I was like, oh,
It's like a $9,000.
yeah, it's a nine. It's on Amazon for $9,000 right now. I was like, oh,
But I mean,
well,
we were talking about it, and like I think one of the applications I'll always say that people probably should evaluate if you're running the cloud is like this whole machine learning, deep learning, like where there's continually churning and the models, like
yeah, if it's
and
always
take
on.
this really recent. I mean, people pay a ton of money on the cloud for that, and there's some infrastructure for big companies like as far as like
Sure.
SageMaker and pushing things in and out, but like it gets so expensive. I mean, like
yeah,
you're
no,
saying, like you could what you were complaining about as far as price, you would probably pay per month, for
easily.
you
the Google, I think it was the Google Vertex estimates of what I would have paid per month for a llama model on Google, which I still have yet to be able to stand up on Google. Google, please
fix that.
take it off or fix it, one or the other. Like I don't understand the point of your nice GUI wizard AI studio if you have models on there that literally won't work on your infrastructure. But it gave me the estimate. It was going to be like $30,000 a year or a month, not a year, a month. I was like, oh, well, shit, $10,000 server doesn't sound too bad at all. And I can depreciate it and write it off. But so just kind of tell people about your strategy, your thoughts, like the pros and cons of it. Because it's not made for everybody, right? Like it's not going to be something that works for every single person out there. But I do think it is just so overlooked these days, especially when, we're talking about billion-dollar publicly traded companies that probably have a lot of their own infrastructure. Just historically, they've always had it. To just kind of tell us a little bit about the why, some of the really big benefits that you have. Obviously cost is going to be one of those, but then also, areas where you would see this being like problematic for if, flipping the script, if you were watching somebody talking about this and you were interested in doing it yourself and you had never done it yourself, or if you are on a big cloud and you're kind of evaluating that.
Yeah, I mean, ours was again kind of born out of experience.
Yeah.
Is when we stood up Revolution, we knew we were spoiled at Chaparral and we had awesome computers. So we were like, we want these same computers. We looked them up and same thing, they're $10,000 new. We're like, well, damn, we can't afford that. Found the same computer refurb for like $1,200. Like, oh, let's try this. So we bought the refurb and it was just as good. So same concept as we started with Azure, and I'd spun up a kind of VM and really hadn't done anything. And I get a bill for the first month and it's like $300. I was like, well, that's ridiculous. Like I can buy a server for $1,600. Why would I pay $300 a month for this VM? And so that was the kind of the first taste of it. And funny you say that. Yesterday I got a email from Azure. So PointFlow Technologies is another one of the verticals. Is we build kind of, our target is the small to mid-size operator, and we've got a pumper app that we've built on Power Apps, and we've got a kind of a WellView competitor that we've built on QuickBooks or QuickBase.
Yep.
And we've explored the idea of building it ourselves, coding an independent app. So we stood up an Azure VM and kind of had a guy help us and built it on there, just a kind of a framework demo. Well, this was 6 months ago, and I turned that VM off in November. Well, I just got an alert that was like, your December bill was $70
for the storage.
Was it $70? Oh, 70? Yeah, that's what it was like the static IP and the storage, and it was like, you got to be an expert to go in and like configure this thing to
when you rip it down that it turns off all the billing.
Right. And then it was like, if I could turn the camera around, I've got 3 computers here sitting next to me that are running different things for different clients. And I think the most I spent was $350 on this Z-Box here, this mini forum. But I bought a $200 refurb that's running my kind of SQL for the accounting. And I don't know, that was my genesis, was like the cost, and I can do, and I can spin up several VMs on these, not just one. So can separate that. And so it really was cost. It was, hey, I can kind of do the same thing.
One control
locally here,
right?
for
like
a lot cheaper.
When you're setting something up from the ground, like you're talking about, right? Like, and you also have so much domain and just real life experience with all the things that you're gonna have to do, right? I know I'm gonna have to have Spotfire. I know I'm gonna have to have WellView. I know I'm gonna have to have all these things, and it's like, oh well, they offer, you can store it in our cloud, and it's like, yeah, they do that to make it easy, but they are gonna I'll be charging you for it as well.
Well, those ones you're paying a super premium for too.
Yeah. No, yeah.
In
Anytime
general.
you're buying storage,
Or you're
from
making concessions. I mean, like Spotfire
Yeah.
Cloud. I mean, I haven't tried it in the last couple of years, but it's always been inferior in my experience to Spotfire.
That was a fun.
self-hosted.
Do you remember that post, Bobby, when I found that I could access everybody else's analysis on Spotfire Cloud?
No, I don't. I don't think I saw that.
Oh, I posted that on LinkedIn because like if you went to the public folder, you could see anybody out there who had saved a public thing, and I could see like other operators' LOSs.
That's
and,
insane.
wow.
Yes, Spotfire wouldn't respond to me, and they finally got like a VP who called me, and he was like, "What are you seeing?" And I showed him. He was like, "Oh man."
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they've since corrected it. But yeah, the cloud versus on-prem is cost, and like you said, John, it's control. One of my we did try like an Azure SQL database, and I noted the first thing I saw was like they don't have SQL agent, which to me, I live in SQL agent.
Right.
I can schedule jobs. I can use SQL agent to execute PowerShell. Kind of use it as like my Windows task scheduler, but I've got it under one hood because I'm opening SQL Management Studio every day anyway. I can just click my job activity monitor and tell me what's ran and what hasn't. And the Microsoft answer is, at that time, it was go use Flow. Flow can do all this. It's like, well, that's now another window I've got to go open. And Flow can't run a local PowerShell script if I'm, say, downloading a price strip and pushing it to a database. So I've got to kind of go build those connectors. And it was ease, but mainly cost. It was like $200 refurb computer that I've had sitting here for 3 years is tenfold paid off versus what a VM would have cost.
Well, I think that's the other big thing too, just in compute in general, right? Like when you say server, everyone thinks of a rack server, and there's so many server. I mean, there's just tower-based servers out there that look
yes,
just like
that's what that is.
right.
Yeah.
Look like desktop PCs that everybody used to have, and they just sit next to your on your desk or wherever you want them to be.
I mean,
right?
compute is getting ridiculous. I mean, you were selling
It's so cheap.
You were selling edge, computers that were basically little servers. I mean, you could probably run half the shit on nukes. I mean, if you needed to. I mean,
Yeah, especially if you're just doing database.
So I mean,
storage.
things are getting cheap. I mean, again, you get old laptops, old PC. I mean, and again, sometimes it's knowledge. Like Jeff, you've set up. I think for me, is more the security. You've set up firewalls and all this stuff, and it's not probably rocket science, but like some of those things that I can spin up a AWS or Azure resource and I can lock it down. I know how to configure all that stuff. I mean, there's time, how fast you need to spin things up, and again, there's those different pillars of cloud of different service tiers, but the shared responsibility model, where it's like what you're doing right now, it's all
right.
You have all the responsibility, which again, if you have the expertise and can do it, that's great. But like for me, generally, like unless it's super cost prohibitive, I'd rather focus on the business, logic.
Yeah.
You can just focus on that more immediately. But again, there's definitely trade-offs with that.
For sure. Well, because even like you mentioned the security thing, right? Like, and I can't tell you how confusing I feel like all IAM security management on every cloud platform is, and out of the gate. And it's like,
and I'm not saying it's better or easier. I mean, I'm not even an expert at it at this point, but
I think, I agree with you. Like they both have their own nuances, right? Like, but I do agree that it really boils down to just like, how comfortable are you being able to roll your sleeves up and figure this shit out?
Yeah. And if you got time, like when you're I mean, sometimes maybe you did or didn't have time for that. You could tell me how it was at, say, when you stood up Revolution, but if you've got some time, like, all right, we're making this acquisition, but we're building up. So there's not really actual like operator work to do yet. Like there's time to, hey, let's get in here and stand up, stand up these services, let's stand up these machines,
You're already operating, and then you go acquire a bunch of acreage, and then you have to figure out how to integrate all of it, right?
Yeah, I agree with your kind of initial thought. I got a whole lot less worried about or placing importance on security once I realized I can drive out to a well site and open the computer out there, and it's got the password written on the door, and I can actually just like get into whatever operator's network just like that. And half the time it's just the default admin password.
Right.
But it's like, again, I kind of debate, like you said, I like to swim upstream. So my MSP brethren are very big on like endpoint protection and firewall. And I'm like, you can do that all you want, but Joe in accounting is still going to click on the free Bass Pro gift card, and he's going to type in his email and password. And now he's been phished.
Yep.
Well, they got his login credentials, so now they can get your cloud server there. I mean, sure, Microsoft's got a great firewall, but when they have direct access to it, it's no more secure than
people are always
else.
going to be the weakest link. I
Oh,
mean, when I was first messing around with the cloud, I mean, I look back now, I'm like, ooh, that was not good.
Well, I mean,
but I was like, I wanted this to work, so let's just set it, 0000 on the.
Yeah, your IP.
And now I can access it.
All ports open.
Yeah.
Public IP.
Yeah, no, I mean, shit.
But-
Bobby and I got Bobby at one point when we were working together got a bill from who was it, AWS we were on for like $1,100 one month, and he was like, "What the hell is this?" We were literally still developing the platform, so like everything was in staging. There was nothing that should have been remotely close to that.
Did you get ping attacked or something?
Like Azerbaijan was mining Bitcoin or something.
Our the developer in his test environment had not changed the password.
Yeah, the Postgres password, I think, or
to
whatever
anything,
it was,
and got in there and spun up a bunch of instances on AWS for their highest compute running mining Bitcoin.
So AWS did refund us, so there was that. But yeah, it was a
well, that's nice of them for your mistake.
No, it's
props to them for that.
Yeah,
but
I mean, it's same thing. We'll
happens all the
watch SCADA devices. You got, I don't know, I think Revolution has like 600 or 700 of them now that are all through one of their assets, and every now and then you'll see one modem just go crazy because someone's hacked it or they ping attack it and try to get in. And but yeah, it to me that stuff happens far less than someone clicking on an email and typing in their password.
Or to your point,
have you seen the new scams where they're even good enough to get your two-factor auth? They'll either call you or text you and be like, "You should have had a code pop up. Enter that here."
Yeah. Or I mean, shit, people get their phones spoofed. I mean, Colin,
you can spoof
Colin
phone
has
too.
Made a very good point internally when we were talking about it. He's like, you've got an hourly kid working at, the phone store, setting up new phones. And it's like, he could literally spoof your SIM when he sets it up for zero effort and then go steal everything he wanted from you. But yeah, and then there's the flip side. Like, it doesn't even have to be that sophisticated. To your point, how many times do you go out in the field and there's, a company field laptop with a sticky note underneath the lid with the password on it? Like, that happens so much. So it is a very valid argument on the security front, because I wholeheartedly agree with you. The most efficient way to get into a company isn't from the outside. It's from phishing and spoofing and trying to get it from the inside of it.
I mean,
I think you're
not wrong, but I think at the same time, two wrongs don't make a right.
No,
I mean, just because most people are doing it wrong. I mean, like, but this could be a whole episode in of itself, just because like setting up too many walls or firewalls or things that people are going to find a way around it. Like, whether they're trying to do something internally and they can't do it, they're going to find a shitty hack. I mean, or someone trying to get in, like, they're going to find that weak point eventually if it exists. But we're kind of running up a little bit on time, but there's two things I would like to, we can get into the speed round the last 5 minutes, but real quick, can you talk about QuickBase and what it's enabled? I mean, John and I actually used QuickBase back in the day at RDS, and I don't know if I've known anyone else using it in our industry until you started using it.
So Marshall Hall kind of came to me. So PointFlow Accounting started doing his accounting at Malloran Energy as an operator that he spun up, and we kind of got to know each other and voiced frustration over some of the lack of innovation and the asset software. And he was like, "Hey, I've got this thing I've been working on," and he showed it to me, and I was like, "That's really cool." And he was like, "The awesome thing is it's cheap and super customizable." So the problem I've experienced is kind of like we talked about with the UWI and APIs. Every single operator has a little bit different way of doing things and a little bit different fields they want to track. So the thing that I thought was really cool about this and why I jumped in to partner with him was, he was like, I can change this well card in 3 minutes to put whatever field you want in it and start tracking this piece of data because it's low code.
Yep.
And I was kind of like in your camp, Bobby, is again, I was like, you really want to have, and more so it's all like, you really don't want to do low code as a long-term solution. And the more I got to thinking about it, is like, everything kind of is low code. If you're pulling in pre-built packages that are supported by XYZ
or libraries,
eventually they might not be supported anymore. Then you got to go rebuild that, kind of scramble. So I jumped in with Marshall, and what we've done is we've kind of built a well view for the small to mid-size operator who can't afford the well view. And we think it does more than a well view, because we've got the daily reporting, costs, vendor tracking, but we also have, flip all the way over to the other side, you can track your vehicles, your vehicle miles, your spills and incidents, your pipelines, your compressor testing, maintenance, work orders, all that kind of stuff. It's got 101 different tables now that we've built in this thing, and it all comes under one hood. You can set up your partners to get automatic emails. But yeah, our goal is we're trying to build a solution for the small to mid-size operator who potentially a little bit cash strapped and want to get out of Excel, or the guys who can't quite afford the price tag of the big name softwares, and even they might be mid-sized with 1,000 wells. Like, man, we're spending a lot of money on this, and all we're doing is tracking workovers and daily costs and sending reports. It's like, okay, we can provide that to you for 25% of the cost. So that was the genesis of it. It's been really cool to watch grow, and we kind of continue to develop it. And I think we have 7 different customers on it right now. But yeah, it's all built on QuickBase. So QuickBase is a low-code provider of software, and there's a couple different add-ins that we run for like the PDF generation and the email. And QuickBase is always innovating, which is cool to see. They've got now pipeline to Microsoft, so you can
better since we
you can right towards the end of our time at RDS. Like I think, did they get bought, or did they get some new?
They had sold. Intuit owned it, then they sold, and then they got bought by somebody else, or they brought.
So they've got more funding now, and then they revamped the API and all that stuff, and it was
they started doing like offline capabilities. So just for reference, Bobby and I, when we were working together, that was our internal basically ERP CRM. We built the entire company workflow around it. So everything from our jobs to the maintenance, all of our assets, all of our equipment, all of the mileage, all of the, the daily rentals and all of that stuff, all the way through to pushing everything out to, QuickBooks for accounting and stuff. But I personally also highly recommend QuickBase, just because it is one of those where it's not so complicated that you need a whole nother, 6 months of training on how to do it, but it's so flexible. When you think of the fact that, like, to me, most of the internet, most apps, most things on the internet are literally just relational databases pointing to each other in APIs, right? Like, you've got relationships between data, and then it's just how you end up displaying that on a screen. And so the way that QuickBooks does it, or QuickBase, is it's essentially you just set up tables for those processes that you want and those different things that you're doing, and then you can relate them all to each other. And there's all these additional plugins. They've got the API. They're constantly developing on it, but it just allows people to your point, it's like everybody has the same general workflow, but then you've got all these nuances for this one thing or this other thing. And then it's like, well, if the software isn't custom built for that, then you're gonna have to get it custom built or find something else. It's like, or you can just do it yourself. That was the beauty of it on our end, because it's like, I mean, I'm not a developer, but I was one of our admins on it at RDS, and we needed something. I could very easily add a new field, spin something up, add a relationship, add a new table, like whatever it needed to be. I could literally go do it in minutes. And I think there's a lot to be said about that people don't really appreciate about a lot of the low code stuff. Is it's like, it gives the SME the ability to go build or fix or solve their problem without having to get IT involved most of the time. And so that's a really powerful thing in a lot of cases.
Yep. And that's what our customers love, is they're like, hey, we, I don't know example, but we want to track this certain data point, or we want to allocate costs this different way. And Marshall and I will knock it out in like 20 minutes and email them back, like, okay, that's done. Like, wow, that was fast. And,
right. You don't have to go refactor the entire code base. You don't have to do, it's very, very straightforward most of the time.
Right. And with the API, you can pull data out, manipulate it, push it back in if you wanted to.
And pull data in via APIs too. I mean, that was one of the big things that we did finally, was we tied our well list for all the jobs that we did back to a public data source. We were using Energent Group at the time.
It just got bought again. Did you see that?
Yeah, I saw that. I actually need to ask Todd about that. But they, and then because our field guys would get the well name, and it would just be whatever the hell the company man told them the well name was, not what the public well name was.
Well,
or
no
API
back
numbers.
Full circle, the API number.
Right. Yeah.
Because we didn't have API numbers like in there. Right? When I got there, I was like, oh, you guys aren't using API number, or something to identify the well.
We couldn't even get the API number because we couldn't get the full damn well name from, the actual well name. It's like, oh yeah, it's the UL 24. And I think it's in Lee County, New Mexico. It might be in
Does it
Eddy.
have a number
I don't
sign
know.
in it, a space,
Right.
a dash?
Yeah, exactly. And so like I was able to get it. So they put in the state and county, and then that auto filtered the well list. And then as they typed, it dropped down recommendations, and they clicked on it, and then it pulled in all the wellheader information automatically. And it completely
Lat
changed
longs, all
all
that
of
stuff.
that data. Yeah. I really wanted it mainly for the lat longs and just so we had a normalized naming convention for all the stupid
There was even
wells.
stuff I don't know if it ever got there, but we were talking about trying to do like some geofencing around it.
Mhm.
So like when they came with the geo tab and they got within, we could almost calculate how much time we were on location
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because we also had trackers on all the company vehicles, so we knew where all the vehicles were. Like being able to tie all that data together is so valuable, and a lot of people don't. Like low-code tools like that really help accelerate a lot of that stuff. But we've got 4 minutes left, so we've got to jump into the speed round. Dun, dun, dun.
Sure,
I
let's go.
need like a button drop. I'm gonna see if this will. There we go. Hopefully it's not 30 seconds long. There we go.
There you go.
Thanks, Bobby.
Learning on the fly here.
Yeah. I scared the shit out of myself the other day because I accidentally hit one before we were recording, and I was like, where did that come from? I had no idea they were all programmed. Speed round. So just short, quick answers. What are some books that you either recently liked and recommend, or just generally speaking like and recommend?
Oh man, I'm gonna get deep into my mind here. No, Overton Window is a good one. Rich Dad Poor Dad,
Yeah.
and then the micro books are the 3 that I read most recently.
I didn't realize until after I read it that Rich Dad Poor Dad, he went to the Merchant Marine Academy.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah.
That.
But
Well, you better hurry up, Bobby. If
Yeah.
you're gonna catch up with him.
eh.
Fair.
All right, I think I know the answer to this one, but I'm interested to see you say, who's your favorite social media follow?
Ooh, probably a tie between Elon and DHH.
Okay, DHH is who I was thinking. So
Yeah, I think you were the one that even like kind of triggered me onto him, but he's pretty anti-cloud and big on-prem guy, and for the same reason I brought up earlier, costs. I think people just ignore costs in the name of convenience, and
Yeah.
He's kind of calling that out, so I like it.
yeah, no, and they've been fighting the fight against a lot of people. I mean, like I think you probably identify because he's you on a much bigger scale. Like he's taking on
much more
Apple. Yeah, well, I mean, success is relative, but like, I mean, you're doing pretty great.
Thanks,
but
buddy.
I mean, he's taking on Apple, like because they wouldn't put his calendar stuff on the App Store. I mean, like he's not afraid to ruffle feathers.
Yeah, that was a
Yeah,
fun.
that's probably what I like about Elon too. Is he's got great technology and kind of same. Just says it's on his mind.
No, that was a fun Twitter back and forth to watch
Yeah.
this past week. Last one, then we'll wrap it up. What is your? I know the answer about your favorite database is going to be SQL.
Favorite cloud service? No.
Yeah, no. Answer that question.
Postgres.
Answer that question. Favorite cloud. I'm going to make you answer that question.
Oh,
since
I'd
you
say.
hate it so
I mean,
much.
I'm a Microsoft guy. So
There we
we're
go.
gonna stick
Yeah,
with
it's
Azure.
Azure.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Where can people find you? Where can people find PointFlow? How they get in touch?
PointFlow.co is the website, and again, one of those. Why did you do PointFlow.co? It gets caught in spam filters, and people mistype it all the time. And I don't know. I just picked. I thought it was.
Because the domain
I thought it was techie and
available.
edgy, and it's kind of cost me a few things. But yeah, PointFlow.co, or LinkedIn. Just search for Jeff Hughes or kind of whatever. Those Jeff@PointFlow.co is my email.
I know what I should have asked you who your favorite bank is and why is it Chase?
Oh man,
We don't have enough
Yes.
for that conversation.
Jesus.
We'll follow up on that with the next episode.
I have gotten through
Oh, man.
2 of my 4 stacks coding these in. Thanks, Chase Bank.
They picked the wrong accountant to do that too.
Ugh.
Had they known you were an accountant and also knew how to code, they would have been like, maybe we just figured this out for him.
Unbelievable.
Awesome.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, man, absolutely.